Caught Stealing is a crime comedy taking place in New York in 1998. It follows Hank Thompson, played by Austin Butler. He's a baseball fanatic slash bartender who is asked to cat sit for his neighbor Russ while he's out of town, which leads Hank into getting caught in the crosshairs of a criminal conspiracy. I'll keep the synopsis at that to avoid spoilers, but this is a comedy following a character defined by self-destructiveness. Hank is a troubled young man who no longer knows his place in the world, so he parties a lot, damaging himself as he numbs the pain of a past trauma. As a result of that and his obsessive baseball fandom, he's a bit detached from reality, he's not very empathetic, and he's actually a bit self-indulgent and careless. It's truly a wrong place at the wrong time story. Hank should not have anything to do with these crooks who are pursuing him, but to a fault, he's not very good at staying out of trouble or talking himself out of situations. Sports fandom is written all over this movie. Not only is Hank constantly watching and talking about baseball, likely to vicariously experience the sport that he once loved through others, but seemingly the whole city relishes in fandom. The backdrop of New York is very much felt through the grit, but also through the spirit of the city folk who live it up like the world is ending, because some of theirs have, figuratively speaking. This movie is also a tad bit punk rock, not really punk as a concept, but you definitely get the rundown, crass nature and the aesthetics, which also makes the quirkier aspects of the film stand out more. The characters are all pretty silly, especially the supporting characters. They're an oddball bunch, making the movie feel like a fun melting pot of characters. That said, Zoe Kravitz, Matt Smith, and Bad Bunny are characters I would have loved to have seen more of. Liev Schreiber and Vincent D'Onofrio also play pretty small roles, but aptly so. Their characters didn't really feel like massive players that the movie needed more of. And then there's Regina King, who we see plenty of, though her character isn't all that interesting. And lastly, there's the star of the movie, the kitty. So adorable. This little guy is quite the fish out of water, adding some silliness and innocence to an otherwise very dark story. Trigger warning though, if you don't like when animals get hurt in movies. All right, and then there's Austin Butler, who, jokes aside, is great as always. He naturally fills the shoes of this role very well, but he also contributes a lot through his commitment, more specifically with his physicality. There's a lot of violence in this movie, and there are so many times where you'll see him in a fight and think, wow, that actually looks very realistic. He plays the edgier, more playful side of the character masterfully, but where he comes up just a little bit short is in the character's emotions. There are times where he just doesn't fully give in to the weight of them at points where it probably would have made more sense to. He often sheds a single tear over a pretty blank face, and that's really it. We do know that he's a very capable actor who can go further, and we do see that a little bit in this movie, so it's probably more likely to be a directorial issue that he just doesn't fully go for it. The obvious counter-argument is that this character is a bit detached, so perhaps it makes more sense this way, but it does make some of the heavier moments feel less impactful. It's nice to see Darren Aronofsky try something different. We're so used to seeing him with his usual grim, psychological, and sometimes controversial takes on troubled characters, so it's cool to see him branch out and put his personal touch on a different genre. We still get the darkness and that Darren Aronofsky edge that might divide some viewers depending on how compelling you think it is, but it's all wrapped up in an underbelly comedy shell. The humor works. It is definitely dry, but not in a way that is bad or uninteresting. It's just subtle, and it mostly comes from the quirky nature of these characters. Sometimes the humor comes from their crass nature, depending on the characters. They typically range anywhere between a little rough around the edges all the way to full-on criminal status. And that feels like good territory to start with criticisms. It just doesn't feel like Aronofsky really understands how heavy some things come off to viewers, not just in this movie, but in several of his films. I think it would be too unfair to say that his directorial style is a lot like Zack Snyder's. Darren's obviously a much more respectable director who makes real films, as opposed to shallow spectacle films for dudes with fedoras. But I gotta say that similar to watching Zack Snyder's movies, I can see the level of edginess that he's going for, and it kinda just feels like he's overshooting to where it's a little bit cute. He sometimes gives a much edgier approach than what his material really needs, which is likely why he often gets grilled for sensitive material in his movies. There's nothing too sensitive in this movie, by the way. This is just a long-winded way of me explaining that deaths in this movie rarely feel like they're being handled the way that they should. Sometimes characters die, and it's actually just frustrating. Obviously, it's hard for me to elaborate without digging into heavy spoilers, but one death in particular was very frustrating and was not given the right amount of space to feel heavy enough. Sometimes seemingly important characters die and they feel like they're being thrown out like toilet paper. Other times characters die and you think, okay, well, why were they even in the movie? And then one at the end was just cringy as hell. This movie walks a strange line where it wants the edge and the violence to be part of the entertainment value, and then sometimes it just skims right past it like it didn't bear any weight. The action was sometimes intense, and then other times it felt pretty cheap. Like, you can hype up a fight scene like it's gonna be really intense and then cut it short for comedic value. You can do that once. Do that 3 times in one movie, and yeah, it just feels like lazy directing where they just don't want to get an action choreographer and the movie loses some of its grit as a result. The biggest problem though is that there is a lot of empty space in the second act. Like, there is a pretty large gap between the inciting incident and the actual quest. There are things happening there that are very character focused and relevant, but the plot just doesn't move forward for a while, and by the time that it does, the whys just don't really matter at all. Like, why are these criminals pursuing Russ and tearing through Hank in the process? And why are there so many people involved in this conspiracy? By the time we learn all of these things, they just don't really matter anymore. And then it's just all about watching things play out in a very predictable manner. And lastly, and to clarify, I kind of mean this in a tongue-in-cheek way, Darren Aronofsky really needs to chill out on the extreme close-ups. As if Mother having 30% of its runtime consist of tight shots of Jennifer Lawrence's expressionless face wasn't enough. There are times here where just Austin Butler's face, though very handsome, was taking up too much screen time. There are plenty of other holes you can poke in this movie. You will probably think, wait, why wouldn't they just do this? You'll probably think that at least once, if not several times. So the movie is not airtight. It's definitely quirky and witty, and it's sometimes silly, but it doesn't always deliver on the intrigue, and it just handles death like the less impressive end of DC Comics. So all things considered, I'd say this one lands on the it's fine rating. It's probably best going to serve fans of Darren Aronofsky's movies, but I'm sure plenty of people will find certain aspects of the movie enjoyable. This is not, however, the movie to watch if you want a legitimately interesting crime thriller. The movie's best qualities are its aesthetics and vibes, so proceed only if that's all you're looking for. Thanks for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you next week with my review of The Roses.